First of all, we'd like to welcome everyone for coming out here today. My name is Sowards. I am studying computer science, and I'm also working on my BFA here at Adams State University.
My name is McMullen. I am actually a double major here at Adams State University. I am studying both exercise science and photography.
I am Ashley Lopez, and I am pursuing a BFA in photography.
And I'm Geminden. I'm getting a degree in cellular and molecular biology, but spent quite a few hours in the photo department. So today we're going to be giving a talk on art and space, the blending of arts and sciences. But before we do this, we're going to give an overview. And so first we're going to talk about what Demostat is, and just kind of give a brief overview about what we're doing and what we're going to achieve with our mission objectives. We'll then move on from here to our designs and testings so that we can tell you how we're trying to achieve these objectives. And finally, we'll talk about the launch and retrieval process, and then at the very end, the interdisciplinary work that has gone into this program with all of us students.
All right, so what is the COSGC? So this actually stands for the Coloradobased Grant Consortium. This is kind of just this compendium of different schools, universities, everything like that. That's really working together. That's co-funded through NASA. Really brings this idea of being able to allow students to have some form of space research as well. It's a very inexpensive program by comparison to other space-based programs, and it's really used to help inspire and educate through public outreach and really expanding that the idea of wanting to do more research based with space. All right, so specifically we're working with something that's referred to as the Demostat. So what exactly is the Demostat? It is a small capsule designed for a weather balloon flight. We actually have our Demostat capsule right here on display. This is another program that's offered through the Coloradobased Grant Consortium. There are other programs that are offered, but this is the one that we chose to pursue. This project really allows for low-cost access to the study of the edge of space. With this, typical payload costs go from anywhere from about $50 to about $500. So very, really price range, very accessible as well. This also challenges students to design unique balloon payloads because you do have very specific limitations on what can be done with the payloads themselves. Demostat also has numerous launches per year. So for this year, there's actually 4 different launches with 2 balloon launches. This offers more inexpensive ways to conduct different types of experiments, as well as new experiments that haven't been tried yet. Prior experiments also include biological and technological based demonstrations, and ours, we're actually really happy to say, is actually the first with an art emphasis.
So throughout this mission, we do have a few key objectives we'd really like to hit. First and foremost, we'd like to get this thing off the ground. We're going to be using the cameras on here to go ahead and collect 3 different angles of footage, and then we're going to go ahead and stitch those together. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Then we also have some film encapsulated inside there, and we're going to go ahead and develop those, and we'll also be mentioning that here in a moment as well. If anyone would like to build one of these, there's actually a few just parameters that you kind of have to follow. The first and foremost is weight, because this thing has to fly. So we're limited to about 1 kilogram. Well, not about, exactly 1 kilogram. Right now we're sitting at 536 grams is what we were looking at, so definitely underweight. We were very conservative on that. The next is size. So it has to be within a cube that's 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters. And then when this thing lands from its flight, it's going to be hitting at about 35 miles an hour. So one of the biggest importance that you really got to be careful about is how strong it is for that collision. You don't want your data to be lost during that. And so we actually do a lot of testing to make sure that it is ready for that collision. And then also voltage is kind of a weird thing that a lot of people don't think about. If you have a lot of voltage on like a homemade microcontroller, there's a chance that it'll arc in low pressures. So there's actually kind of some very special tests that go into that. Luckily, we were able to get around with that because of our encapsulation of our electrical components. And the last is identification. So this consists of putting an American flag and NASA on there, so if it lands on private property, they don't think it's some kind of invasive piece of machinery.
This is a picture of an example of my video stitching. This was just a rough attempt, so the first try. and I just used video from my cell phone, and just a short 6-second video took 30 minutes to render. So when it lands, you know it's going to be 1 hour and 30 minutes. So hopefully it finishes hopefully it finishes fast.
Before you graduate.
Yeah.
And this is my latest attempt. You can see it's in a hemispheric shape, and that is in hopes to show it at the planetarium. With the 360 video production, I will be collecting the 3 videos once it lands, and once we get back to Adams State, I will be importing the footage into a computer here at the school. I will edit the footage, and that consists of removing the fisheye and adding polar coordinates, which makes it into the hemisphere shape. And after that, I will render it, and that's where it takes it'll make thousands of images. And I will combine them all and then add the audio back, and hopefully the end result is the 360 video.
So just like any other design process, you start out with this ideal kind of look, and it just kind of morphs until you come up with a final product. So if you look over to your far right hand side, you'll notice our initial sketches of what we kind of thought the payload was going to look like. And it kind of changed a little bit. We still have the same idea of a triangular shape. That way we can catch 3 separate directions. That moving image that you see there in the center is actually the current mounting module that is actually still inside the payload, holding the cameras together. And the reason why it's on a pole is kind of interesting. We have to do some tests to make sure that the cameras won't get out of the normal mount they're in, because that'll cause some complications with stitching. So we put it on the pole and swing it like a bat to make sure those don't get out of mount. And then over on your far left-hand side, excuse me, you'll notice that that's another design we were working on, and this is actually the top end of this design, our final design that we came up with. And it was like a really groundbreaking moment because it seemed like it had enough structural rigidity. It had all the cameras angled such that all of them had a little bit of overlay. That way we could perform the stitching very well. So that was kind of our design process. And then we had to do the testing throughout this process the entire time. So there's 3 big kinds of tests that we really had to test this one on. That's the whip test, the pitch test, and the cold test. So the whip test consists of putting it onto a string and whipping it as hard as you possibly can, seeing if the components on the inside break loose. And if they do, then you go back in and make your corrections that are needed. The next is the pitch test. So this is kind of fun. A good way to relieve anger as well. You go to a 3-story building and you drop your payload down and see how damaged it is. And it's about 35 miles an hour when it impacts, so it's a really good comparison. You'll notice though that we don't have destroyed payloads up here. And the reason is because every single time we do these tests, we were so ashamed of how they performed that we didn't take pictures. Granted, the last test we did have successful results, but we were still excited to see the inside, so we just shredded it apart. And the most hopeful times is, of course, building these payloads.
So another component of the research that we're doing that Morris had mentioned is actually putting film on the inside. So in our test, we're actually testing 2 different types of film. We're doing general photosensitive paper and ortholitho film. These are not red light sensitive, but actually red light safe, so they're easy to work with in the darkroom, and it's kind of like our first step into the film world. We were looking at other different film types, but we decided to just kind of make sure that this works. We're going to send stuff that we know works into space first before experimenting with different film emulsions that might get different results. So on the left-hand side here, you can actually see some tests that we've done with radioactive discs and the paper itself. So on the top is beta radiation, and then on the far right is gamma. So you can see as the paper gets darker, it's usually white. So hopefully when we send this payload into the atmosphere and it gets beyond most of the atmosphere and it's exposed to radiation, we might be able to detect and see some different patterns to not only see what kind of radiation we're experiencing, but also maybe get some cool stuff that we can show in galleries and show people how cool this project really is.
So we kind of have a general process that we go through in any launch. So we start out early in the morning because that's when the atmosphere is most settled down, and you tie it onto this big string, and as you can see, you got this line of people, and you run along with the balloon with your payload in your hand until it's ripped out of your hands, essentially, and then you watch it go into the air, disappear into the atmosphere for about an hour and 30 minutes, and then it's being tracked by a GPS. And when the balloon finally pops, it'll go ahead and show us where it lands. We go retrieve it, and then we collect the data and go ahead and do some post-production work to that.
So at launch, there's a little bit more than just letting the balloon go. So first we have to open our payload and start all cameras. Now the cameras aren't actually hooked together or synced in any way that's digital, so we have to actually physically go in and start each camera. And because we're starting each camera physically, there's a time lapse between each camera that we need to synchronize. So when we start the cameras, we actually will be using a little apparatus that has 3 LEDs that will blink simultaneously, that we will put in front of each camera at the same time so we can synchronize footage on the ground rather than relying on anything that would have the cameras communicating to one another. So we will also be putting the film on board and then closing the capsule and beginning the launch. So after we have collected the balloon, hopefully collected the balloon, from the ground, we will need to import all of this footage into the local editing machines here at the school, where Ashley will begin doing the editing on the software as well as stitching the footage together. This will be removing the fisheye effect, as well as I'll start developing the film to see if we have anything to show. Finally, we need to produce this stuff to make it so that we can show to the public. So importing the film to the local supercomputer to do that video stitching and get that process going where we could show it in a place like the planetarium.
So we kind of alluded to this hour and 30-minute flight. And so what is that actually going to look like from the payload standpoint? When it first leaves the ground, it's going to be in these exact same conditions. But as you go higher up into the atmosphere, the temperature is actually going to drop. And that's because there's less molecules bouncing around, they have less energy. And I imagine physicists could explain that much more than I. And then right as it gets below the ozone, that's actually its coldest point. And the reason is because the ozone actually absorbs radiation. And so as it's doing this, that's the point where, right, it's got that expansion, and then as it starts getting into the ozone, it's hitting these molecules that are absorbing radiation, so they have a lot of energy. The temperature starts to rise a little bit, and then as it pokes through the ozone and starts getting into the stratosphere, that starts getting warmed up a little bit, and then it'll start dropping again as we start peaking into the stratosphere. Then right around 20 miles up into the atmosphere, that balloon's going to pop. And then it's going to come back down, and hopefully we can find it, and we'll go from there.
Right, so really a big driving aspect for this project for us really was this idea of interdisciplinary work. This project really is a combination of different departments and disciplines, whether it be health sciences, the biology department, computer sciences, and the arts. Really, we were wanting this idea of being able to unite the art and sciences together to produce a project that is, first off, novel and really hasn't been done before with this particular launch demonstration, as well as just really expand that idea of interdisciplinary work being something that's really interesting. We want more people to really pursue. So a couple of questions that we really asked is, why is this important, and how do we seek really to further interdisciplinary work? So really starting off base projects like this and encouraging others to do cross-department research or anything like that. Oftentimes we don't see a lot of that, and it'd be nice to really see that expansion where different minds come together to solve different problems in ways that might not have been thought of before. We really feel that this is important because it sometimes does get lost in our everyday academia, that we kind of just get stuck in our own departments. I know myself, I've been in my own department and doing a lot of research with those particular individuals, but I haven't expanded further. And this is something that we really wanted to touch on, was expanding that idea of not only research but other projects. Again, another thing that we were really kind of pushing towards was this idea of STEAM. So integrating arts into your science, technology, your engineering, and mathematics. You go every day in your, every single day, basically, we go around and we see art. That's something that we kind of want to help integrate into just that everyday thing. Also, expanding the idea of making projects and research like this very fun. I can't say that there's been a day that we've gone to research and we haven't at least had a little bit of fun while we're doing this, even when we're completely destroying our payloads, and we're still learning, but we're still enjoying what we're doing. This has kind of also been a bit of a pet project for Russell and I for about the past 2.5 years. This is just something we both of us have been really striving towards, figuring out a project that would really expand that idea of how art and science can work together.
Yeah, I think with the photographic sciences, it has started out as a science and has kind of developed into the art world. And so as photographers in the art building, we were kind of wondering where that line had gone, the connection of these two. So by starting this project, it was really important for us to develop that line back so that we can hopefully take creative minds and bring them together to solve problems in a unique way that really hasn't been done before. We really want to open this door to awesome thoughts and collaborative work to make things that will really affect and impact not only campus but hopefully the statewide. One of the proudest moments, I guess, for me, and I'm assuming my team too, is that at the CubeSat conference, we were one of the most diverse groups there. When they were asking us what our majors were and where we were from, we were saying that we were not only mathematicians but painters, not only health scientists but photographers, not only biologists but other things. And that was kind of a proud moment. One of the people that has been helping us has really encouraged that, and it's been really neat. So we'd also like to acknowledge some people, especially Eric Stewart and George Selman, for giving us this opportunity. It's been really great to learn beneath you and ask questions and get creative feedback. We'd also like to thank Bernadette Garcia for helping guide us in our CubeSat journeys for questions that weren't easy to answer. Finally, we'd like to thank the Colorado Space Grant Consortium and NASA for funding this so that we had the opportunity to do this. Are there any questions?
So, maybe this is a silly question. What if it lands in water?
That's a genuine concern.
Okay.
The
I didn't know
footage
that was-
should maintain, but the film
would
is
be
likely to
lost.
be compromised in that case. The cameras are encased such that there's no water can penetrate them,
Okay.
but the film's kind of
Okay, because
gone
I was
at that point.
horrifically imagining 3
Yeah,
GoPros.
thank goodness Colorado's not near an ocean.
I think it'll just begin the development process of the
There
film.
we go.
Probably.
Anybody interested?
I was wondering if you could tell me how you're going to go about doing the video stitching to create the film.
I will be using Adobe After Effects and Photoshop, and I just load everything in there and edit it and render it, and I will add everything back together, the image sequence, and do the hemispheric shape, and then add the audio back, and it'll be in the 360 video.
And so how will you get that hemispheric shape from the 3 images?
Oh, so when I render the video, it makes it into each second like its own picture. So then I will batch sequence everything in Photoshop and adding the polar coordinates, and that just makes it into the hemispheric shape. So then every file with the batch, every file will get that hemispheric shape.
Did that answer your question?
So what are the videos going to look like? Will it just be landscape, or will it be sky? Will it be birds, planes?
Will basically be kind of a combination of all of that, because we're actually we will be starting on the ground and then launching all the way up. The GoPros actually have a very, very, very wide angle lens on them, so they're going to catch basically everything from those the 3 angles that we have set. So it's going to be everywhere from landscape all the way up to when we actually reach near atmosphere. It's going to be more of a space-oriented image.
And if I may add to that, as far as the actual viewing for that, that's kind of left up to after we have that stitched together and have it in that 360-degree format. So if you want to view it on your phone, I know Facebook will accept some formats, and so you can essentially move your phone around and view this video while it's playing. Also, if you're, have you been to the planetarium by chance? So that it will be playing in there, hopefully as well. That's got a lot of work into it as far as that goes. But yeah, any other questions?
So are there, so you're talking about, if I remember correctly, beta and gamma radiation. So is there any effect of beta and gamma radiation on digital footage? So will that affect the GoPro in any way?
It shouldn't. I know that there was some research done in the past with some other fellow CubeSat teams that actually had special filters that could detect radiation. Now over time, if you look at companies that are actually doing videography in space, like the International Space Station, it does have wear and tear on the cameras themselves, but it's not really detectable. So while it can harm components when in space for a long time, I don't think there's going to be anything that will be detectable that will harm footage.
Thank you guys.